Wyoming Territory, December 1879. The snow had fallen heavy overnight, thick and silent as it blanketed the Wind River foothills. The cold bit through wool and leather both, and yet she was out there, bare hands red and raw, dragging a bundle of firewood through the drifts, alone. Harlan Tate spotted her first from his saddle, his horse stiff beneath him from the cold. He had been riding eastward toward Fort Washakie with a wagon of supplies, but something about the figure in the woods made him pull up short. A woman, slim and cloaked in a torn wool shawl, dragging a bundle too large for her size, her boots soaked and patched. She looked up and froze. Harlan raised one gloved hand slowly. "Ma'am." She did not answer, only clutched the bundle tighter and backed up a step. Her eyes darted behind him, toward the trees. She looked like she was about to bolt. "I'm not here to hurt you," he said, voice gentle but clear. "You out here alone?" Still no answer. Then, finally, she said, "I have to go." Her voice was hoarse, like it had not been used in days. She turned and staggered off through the trees, not toward any road or trail, but deeper into the hills. Harlan hesitated only a second before nudging his horse after her. "Wait," he called. "You should not be out here in this cold. Let me help." She vanished behind a boulder, and when Harlan rounded it, he saw the narrow crevice in the cliff wall. She slipped inside. A cave. He tied his horse and followed on foot, cautious. The cave mouth was low, just high enough to stand inside. The air smelled of smoke and damp stone. Inside, a tiny fire crackled low, and curled on a bed of old furs and pine needles was a baby, wrapped tight in a patched quilt. The woman was crouched beside the child now, holding it close, watching Harlan like a frightened deer. "I will leave," he said quietly. "But your fire's too low. You will freeze out here." She did not blink. "We are fine. The snow's still falling," he said. "Your fingers are near frostbitten." "I said we are fine." Harlan looked at her, really looked now. She was young, maybe 22, with tangled dark hair and hollow cheeks. Her clothes were worn to threads. The baby stirred in her arms and whimpered. He took a slow step back. "All right, I will leave some wood outside the cave for you. I will not come back unless you want me to." She said nothing. He left the bundle of dry wood by the cave mouth, mounted up and rode on. The next morning Harlan was back. He left bread and smoked venison by the same rock. He did not see her. The day after that, he left another bundle, and this time, when he turned to leave, her voice came from behind him. "Why are you doing this?" He turned. She was standing by the cave entrance now, arms around the baby, wary but less afraid. "Because you should not be alone out here," Harlan said. "And that baby sure as hell should not be." She looked down at the child, then back up. "We are not your problem. You are not a problem. You are a person. With a child." She stared at him for a long moment, then said, "My name is Willa Hayes." He nodded. "Harlan Tate." He slowly approached the rock and crouched. "Is there someone I can send word to? Family?" "No one," she said softly. "They are all gone." He did not ask more. Over the next few days, she let him come closer. Never too close, never inside the cave, but close enough to talk. The baby was a girl, 8 months old, named Eliza. Willa had been on the run since spring. She would not say from who. Only that she had no money, no home, and no one left to trust. "I found the cave in August," she said one morning, kneeling by the fire with Eliza asleep in a sling across her chest. "It was the only place I could hide. I did not think the snow would come this fast." "You should not be here," Harlan said. "You and that baby belong somewhere warm. Safe." "There is nowhere." "There is," he said. "I have a cabin, west of the river. It is small, but it has a roof and a stove. You would be warmer. You could rest. She shook her head. I cannot trust you. I do not blame you, he said. But I am not a danger to you. I swear it. She looked at him a long time, weighing something heavy. Then she said, You can come back tomorrow, if I am still here. I will go with you. That night, a storm rolled in. Harlan barely slept. By sunrise, he was riding hard, snow in his beard and on his shoulders. He reached the cave, heart pounding. The fire inside had gone out. Willa, he called. No answer. He ducked inside and found her curled on the floor, Eliza pressed tight to her chest, her face pale, lips blue. He dropped to his knees. Willa, Willa, can you hear me? Her eyes fluttered open. I waited, she whispered. I waited. I could not keep her warm. You do not have to, he said. Not anymore. He wrapped them both in his coat and carried them out into the snow. By the time he reached his cabin, Willa was barely conscious. He laid her on the bed, fed the fire until the stove glowed red, and warmed Eliza beside her mother. He boiled broth, fed it to Willa spoon by spoon. She did not speak for hours, just watched him with tired eyes, like she could not believe he was real. That night she cried, silent tears that slid down her cheeks while she held her daughter close. Harlan sat beside her, quiet. You are safe now, she nodded. I thought I would die out there. You did not. You kept her alive. That is more than most could do. She looked at him, really looked. Why did you come back? Because I could not stop thinking about you, he said simply. You and her, out in that cold. Willa reached out, touched his hand. Thank you. He closed his fingers over hers. You never have to be alone again. She did not let go. By late December, the cabin smelled of wood smoke and boiled sage, the scent clinging to the beams and the worn quilt Willa now slept beneath. The storm hadn't let up for 3 days, and the snow outside had risen past the window sills, muffling the world in a hush that made even the crackle of the stove seem loud. Eliza had taken to the warmth quickly. Her cheeks had pinked back to life, and she spent most of the day dozing on a folded wool shirt Harlan had given Willa to use as a cradle pad. She startled less often now. Willa noticed. I think she knows, Willa said one evening, voice low, her back to the fire as she watched the baby stir, that she won't have to wake up cold anymore. Harlan looked up from the basket of kindling he was sorting near the hearth. Babies feel more than folks give them credit for. She didn't cry for nearly 2 days after you brought us here, Willa said. She just slept like she didn't trust the quiet. He set another log on the fire. She trusts it now? She's learning. Same as me. She hadn't always spoken this much. The days in the cave had left her guarded and spare with words. But now, with the wind howling outside and Eliza warm on the floor between them, she let her voice stretch further than it had in months. I used to lie awake thinking about Missouri summers, she said. The air so thick you'd sweat before sun up. My sister would soak the sheets in the well water just to cool off at night. You had a sister? Sadie. 2 years older. She married a blacksmith and moved to Independence the same spring I got married. Her fingers went still on the hem of Eliza's wrap. I never saw her again after that. Harlan didn't ask the name of the man she'd married. He didn't ask what had happened. Her eyes had drifted toward the flames, and he could see the weight settle there again. Instead, he shifted closer and offered her the tin cup he'd filled with steeped pine needles and a pinch of dried raspberry leaf. Helps the lungs, he said. She took it with a nod. You always have something in your pocket for what hurts. I spent a few years riding with a scout who'd been raised by his grandmother. She taught him to listen to the land. He leaned back against the hearthstone. He passed some of it to me. Not enough. Willa took a sip, then wrapped both hands around the cup. "Do you miss riding?" "I miss the quiet between towns," he said. "The space to think. But I don't miss the rest." He glanced toward the window, where the snow pressed against the glass in soft curves. "Hard to carry peace with you when you're always moving." She didn't reply to that, but he could see her eyes shift toward Eliza, then back to the window. Later, after she'd tucked the baby in the cradle and banked the stove, she stood near the door for a long moment before speaking again. "Were you always alone out here?" He kept his gaze on the fire. "Not always. My brother lived down by the foothills before he took sick. That was 4 winters ago." "You stayed after he passed?" "Didn't see much point in leaving. The land doesn't ask anything from a man except that he treated honest. That's more than I can say for most folks." She stepped away from the door, slow and quiet, and sat near him, close enough that their knees almost touched. "I don't know what we're supposed to do now," she said. "You don't have to figure it all at once," he said. "You're warm. She's safe. That's enough for tonight." She didn't reply, but her shoulders eased, and she leaned back against the wall beside him. They sat like that for a long time, the fire throwing orange light across the floor, Eliza's breathing soft in the cradle. When Willa finally spoke again, her voice was steadier. "I used to hum her to sleep, even when we couldn't risk a fire. I'd barely whisper, but she'd settle." "Will you hum now?" Harlan asked. She glanced at him, uncertain. He nodded. "It's just us." So she did. A quiet tune, worn and soft like a memory. Nothing fancy, just enough to fill the space between the logs popping in the fire. He closed his eyes and let it wrap around the room. She didn't stop when Eliza stirred. She just kept humming, steady and sure, and something in Harlan's chest, something long rusted, moved. When the song ended, Willa looked at him. Her eyes didn't flinch. "She's all I have," she said. "You're not alone in that anymore," he answered. She held his gaze, then nodded once. They didn't speak again that night, but when Harlan rose to add another log to the fire, she didn't move away when his hand brushed hers. By the first week of January, the wind had calmed. The snow still lay deep against the hills, but the sky had held clear for 2 days, and sun filtered weakly through the frost-laced windows. Harlan had begun clearing the path between the cabin and the creek in short lengths, breaking the crust with an axe before shoveling. Each swing echoed down the hollow like a drumbeat. Inside, Willa stitched a tear along the shoulder seam of his second coat, her fingers quicker now that her hands had regained their steadiness. Eliza dozed in a basket near the stove, one small fist curled tight around a scrap of wool Willa had tied to a string. When Harlan came in, boots leaving tracks across the floorboards, she didn't look up. "You're tracking half the mountain onto that rug," she said, voice dry. He leaned his hat against the wall and peeled off his gloves. "Reckon it's not much of a rug to begin with." She set her needle aside. "Still keeps the splinters off our feet." He glanced toward the cradle. "She sleep through the chopping?" "Didn't even stir. You've worn her out with all that bouncing the last 2 days." He crouched beside the stove, rubbing his hands near the heat. "She likes it. Calms her." "She likes you." He looked over at her. "Do you?" Willa didn't smile, but her eyes stayed on his. "I wouldn't have stayed if I didn't." They sat quiet a moment, the air between them warm with something unspoken. Then Harlan straightened and walked to the shelf by the door, lifting a small wrapped parcel. "You've been making do with what you had," he said. "Figured you ought to have your own." She took the bundle he offered and unwrapped it with care. Inside was a pair of wool mittens, smaller than his, the cuffs stitched with a row of red thread. "They're yours," he said. "I traded for them last fall. Thought they'd be for someone else. But I never gave them." She traced the seam with her thumb. "Why not?" He sat on the edge of the table, hands folded. Didn't know what I wanted back then. Only knew what I didn't. And now, I want what's under this roof. You. Her. His voice stayed quiet. If you'll let me keep it. Willa folded the mittens back into the cloth. I don't know how to be someone's again. You're not someone's, he said. You'd be mine the way I'd be yours. No debts. No owing. She stood, slowly, and crossed the room to him. Her hand settled on his chest. Steady. I don't scare easy anymore. You never did, he said. She leaned in, her forehead resting lightly beneath his chin. He wrapped his arms around her, careful but sure, and she let him. That night, she sat beside him on the porch after Eliza fell asleep, wrapped in the quilt she'd mended that afternoon. The moon lit the trees in silver, and the creek below ran faint beneath its ice. I keep thinking about how I almost didn't wait that morning, she said. The day you came back. I would have searched until I found you. I know that now. She turned toward him, her breath visible in the cold air. I'm not running anymore. He took her hand, warm inside the new mitten. Then stay. Not just for the season. For good. She nodded once. I will. And there beneath the winter sky, quiet and sure, they sat side by side, the wind no longer something to brace against, but a sound that passed over them and moved on. January faded into February with a slow thaw. The snow didn't melt so much as settled deeper into itself, compacting under its own weight until it gleamed crusted and hard, like sugar left too long in the cold. The days lengthened by minutes, but the nights still held sharp teeth. Harlan had begun tending to the fence line again, now that the deep drifts had receded from the low pasture. He worked the posts with gloved hands and steady eyes, and Willa watched from the porch, Eliza pressed snug against her back in the wrap she'd sewn from a spare flour sack and the hem of one of Harlan's old shirts. You think this land mine's being shut in like that? She asked one morning, as he hammered a split rail into place. He looked up, brushing snow from his brow with his wrist. Land don't think much on it. It just holds what it can. She shifted Eliza higher on her shoulder. I used to think fences were just ways to keep people out. He straightened, resting his weight against the post. Sometimes they're meant to keep something safe in. She stepped down into the yard, her boots crunching over the hard, packed earth. You ever think about putting something else in here besides horses? Wasn't much reason to before. He paused, glancing at her. But I've been thinking about chickens. Willa raised a brow. You? Raising hens. I've seen worse ideas. She laughed then, the sound low and unexpected, and Eliza stirred against her back, making a small, questioning sound. I think she agrees, Willa said. She's got a good ear for plans. They walked the line together after that, Harlan pointing out the places where the rails needed mending, Willa offering quiet suggestions about which trees might be too close and which shrubs would come back strongest come spring. She didn't hesitate to speak now. She moved with ease through the yard, her gaze fixed on the place rather than the way out of it. At supper, Willa pulled a small bundle from beneath the hearthstone, a tin of dried apples she'd found behind the cabin wallboards. She'd been cleaning out the pantry shelves and spotted the glint of metal tucked just past the last beam. You hiding treats from yourself? She teased as she set them on the table. Harlan leaned in, inspecting the tin. That's from last fall. I meant to trade it but forgot it was there. You've got a habit of forgetting things that might be useful later. You calling me careless? Only with things you're willing to give away. He looked at her then, something unspoken passing between them as the lamplight flickered across the table. Do you miss Missouri? He asked after a while. She took a breath, then shook her head. I used to miss what I thought I had, but the longer I'm here, the more I see how small it really was. Everything back there was something I had to survive. This place doesn't ask that of me. You're not just surviving now. No, she said. I'm not. Eliza stirred then, a soft whimper that meant she'd be waking soon. Willa stood and lifted her gently, cradling her in one arm while she rocked her with the other. She's heavier, Harlan said. Growing fast. She'll be walking before the snow's gone, if she keeps at it. You think she'll remember any of this? Willa looked down at her daughter. Not with her head, but maybe somewhere in her bones. That night, as they readied for sleep, Willa reached for the small drawer by the bed. From inside she pulled a folded square of paper, creased and worn. She handed it to Harlan without speaking. He opened it slowly. A pencil sketch, rough but careful, 3 figures. A man, a woman, and a child in a cradle. No names written, just lines and shadows. I started it in the cave, she said. Didn't know who the man was then. He looked down at the drawing, then at her. Do you know now? She nodded. I do. He folded the paper and slid it back into the drawer. Let's make this real, Willa. Not just something drawn. She didn't answer with words. She stepped forward, rested her hands on his chest, and pressed her lips to his with quiet, certain weight. Outside, the wind moved through the trees like a slow breath, and inside the cabin, a new kind of stillness settled, one not of waiting, but of belonging. By early March, the last hard frost had lifted from the ground, and the creek ran louder with meltwater, cutting a silver path through the thinning snow. A pale green flush crept across the lowest hills, and the cottonwoods near the cabin stretched bare branches toward the sun with quiet patience. The world was waking again. Willa stood outside with a basket beneath one arm, her other hand steadying Eliza's back as the child tugged determinedly at a patch of lichen-covered stone. Her balance had improved in the past week. She could take 3 full steps now without falling, and each one seemed to fill her with pride. Willa never let her stray too far. She's eyeing that stump like it owes her something, Harlan said from the corner of the porch, where he was oiling the hinges on the barn latch. She's got her father's stubbornness, Willa said, brushing a stray curl from Eliza's temple. Harlan paused. Is that what I am? Willa looked up at him, face calm, voice steady. If you want to be. He set the oil can down and crossed the yard. I do. They hadn't spoken of it in words before, not plainly. But the rhythm of their life had taken on a shape too natural to question. He'd begun carving a cradleboard for Eliza, not because she needed it, but because his hands itched to make something lasting for her. Willa had started marking the days on a strip of hide tacked behind the stove, counting forward now instead of backward. Willa glanced toward the small stack of lumber Harlan had hauled from town the week prior, still wrapped in canvas near the barn wall. You planning to build something with that? She asked. Smokehouse, he said. If we're keeping this many mouths fed, we'll need it come fall. Willa shifted the basket to her other hip. So you're thinking ahead now. I'm not looking for ways out anymore. She stepped closer, so that Eliza's hand brushed against his leg. Then I think it's time. For what? For me to marry you. Harlan blinked once. That so? Willa nodded. I want my daughter to grow up with a name that means something, and I want that name to be yours. He looked down at Eliza, who had taken hold of his bootlace with a pleased grunt, and then back at Willa. I've never been the kind of man folks write about in books. I'm not looking for a story, she said. I'm looking for a life. He reached for her hand, drawing it into his. Then we'll build it. They married 2 days later in the clearing behind the cabin, under a sky washed soft with early spring light. Harlan cleaned the porch boards until they shone pale with soap and sun. Willa wore a dress she'd altered from a spare muslin shift. The sleeves now fitted close and stitched with a single line of blue thread along the hem. Eliza sat in her arms during the ceremony, wide-eyed and quiet, as if she knew something important was being sealed. The man who officiated was a rancher from 3 valleys over, a quiet widow named Amos who had once been a preacher before his wife died. He didn't ask questions, just read the words slow and clear, his voice gravelly with age. Afterward, they shared a meal of brown bread and salted pork, and Willa pulled a small jar of chokecherry preserves from the back of the pantry, a gift from a Shoshone woman who had passed through the previous summer. It was the sweetest thing they'd tasted all winter. That night, after Eliza had fallen asleep curled between them on the quilted bed, Harlan turned toward Willa, his hand resting lightly on her hip. "You still sure?" he asked. She laid her head against his chest. "There's no part of me that wants to be anywhere else." He kissed the crown of her head, slow and sure. "Then this is where we begin." They rose early the next morning, the sun warm against the cabin windows for the first time in months. Harlan took Eliza out to see the chickens he'd traded for in town the week before, 4 hens and a rooster, all loud and curious. The child squealed with delight each time a feathered head bobbed toward her. Willa watched them from the doorway, her hands wrapped around a mug of boiled chicory root. She saw how easily Harlan moved now, how steady his shoulders had become. She saw the care in the way he held Eliza, not like a burden but like a promise. The land around them would green soon. The garden rows had already been mapped in charcoal along the cabin wall. There would be onions, beans, maybe squash if the soil held well enough. Willa had begun saving eggshells for compost. The past would never be forgotten, but it no longer reached its hands into her days. It lived behind her now, quiet and still. What stretched ahead was different. Not perfect, but whole. That evening, they sat together in the yard, Eliza asleep in Willa's lap, her small hand curled around Harlan's thumb. The horizon flared orange and gold, and the first frogs called from the creek. "I think she'll remember this," Harlan said. Willa smiled. "Even if she doesn't, we will." The light faded slow, and the stars came out one by one, and the cabin behind them stood steady in the dark, holding warmth and the hush of a life begun right. And they never left it, not in heart, not in body. They grew there, seasons turning around them, each year deeper than the last. Together, always.